There we go. And I'll ask Vice Chair Tracy Orvis to get things started.
Okay. All right. So the Design and Landmarks Committee Design Review Meeting of January 3rd, 2022 is called to order. The purpose of this meeting is to consider land use application master file number VR-2021-0.
Wait, sorry, timeout. Sorry.
Okay.
Before we jump into that piece of it, we should just run through I think the only real other thing on the agenda is just approval of the notes from September. And then we should just ask, I guess, if anyone who's in participation tonight has something they want to talk about besides what's already on the agenda. I'm sorry about that.
Sorry, not my usual thing either. So, okay. So did anyone have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes from our last meeting?
I think it was September 7th.
I don't personally.
I move that we approve them.
Okay. And then in terms of informational items, I don't have anything of information that isn't listed somewhere else on the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about just the committee's overall, the forecast for the coming year a little bit later. But Vice Chair, if you'll just ask if anyone in the audience maybe has any items that they'd like to discuss that aren't related to either the design review hearing that we're having or the committee's function for the coming year. And I'll look for hands or something in the Q&A if people want to raise their hand, if they have something that's not otherwise on tonight's agenda that they're wanting to talk about.
Anyone? Does anyone have anything that they'd like to bring up before we?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. So, all right. Vice Chair Orvis, forward with the agenda.
All right.
I'll get out of the way.
All right. So as I mentioned, this is January 3rd, 2022, and we're considering land use application VR-2021-017. The purpose of this application is to allow development of a 6-story multi-unit building with 55 workforce dwelling units located at 2206 Southeast Washington Street. This design review meeting is not a formal public meeting. A public hearing with the Planning Commission is scheduled for January 25th, 2022, and will be an opportunity to consider all aspects of the proposed development. This meeting is specifically focused on the building design and the request for a height variance. This design review meeting will be organized in the following order. City staff will make a presentation to explain the application. Then the applicant will have an opportunity to make a presentation. The public will then be allowed to comment on the application as it relates to downtown design review. And the Design and Landmarks Committee will then deliberate on the application and will forward a recommendation to the Planning Commission. I'll recognize those people who raise their hand when we open the meeting for public comment. When you're called on to speak, please make sure to state your name and address for the record so they can be entered into the minutes. The Design and Landmarks Committee will make a recommendation to the Planning Commission regarding whether the application conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. And at this point, I'll ask the staff to cite the zoning ordinance section where the criteria can be found.
I guess you're asking me, okay. The approval criteria for the building height variance is in 19.911.
All comments should be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria just described. And if you comment, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. I believe further in our notes, we make a reference to a limit of 3 minutes. So if possible, try and keep your comments to that time frame. All right, at this point, does any member of the Design and Landmarks Committee wish to abstain? No, I'm good. Does any member of the Design and Landmarks Committee wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Does any member of the Design and Landmarks Committee wish to report on any ex parte contacts? I do not, Mary. Nope. Okay. Will any committee member who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any of those committee members who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application? I did not. Mary did not. Okay. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Design and Landmarks Committee? Anything? All right. Oh gosh, I just lost my spot. Sorry. All right. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Design and Landmarks Committee to hear this matter? Okay. Then if there are no further comments, then let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening. Thanks very much for having us. Vera Coley, Senior Planner, and I'm the manager, or I'm managing this land use review application. If I may, I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to ask you if you can see the presentation. Hopefully this works. I'm never quite sure if it will. Okay, let's go here. All right. Is everyone seeing a PowerPoint presentation? Great.
I can see it. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you. Okay. All right. So the proposal, as summarized by Vice Chair Orvis, is to construct a 6-story residential building. So it's a standalone residential building with 55 workforce-priced dwelling units in it. The building would include shared amenity spaces, common outdoor area in a central courtyard, and integrated stormwater planters. The top floor includes a rooftop deck that you can see in this image. The proposed building is pursuing Earth Advantage or LEED green building certification. As part of the application, there is a parking quantity modification request. I'll get to that in another slide, to allow the development to be built with no off-street parking on the site, but rather to allow 43 parking spaces to be available on 2 other downtown properties that would be available by lease or for lease to the tenants. The building complies with the maximum building height at just under 65 feet. The maximum building height in the DMU is 69 feet with bonuses. But because they're asking for 6 stories, that allows them to add the rooftop deck and 9 additional dwelling units. They have asked for the 6th story, and that requires a height variance in the downtown. All right, so the application components, as I said, there is a variance request for building height. They are requesting a parking quantity modification. There is 19.907 talks about the downtown design review aspect, but because this is a standalone residential building, 19.907 allows an applicant to opt into which review process they would like to go forward with when it is a standalone residential building. The applicant has opted to go through the multifamily design guidelines review process as opposed to the downtown design review process as it relates to the design of the building. So they have designed the building to comply with 19.505.3 rather than 19.508, which are the downtown design standards. There's also a component of the project that is the transportation facilities review that relates to transportation and traffic and the design of the project as it relates to vehicular, pedestrian and bicycle traffic. The DLC's role here, again, is to provide a recommendation to the Planning Commission. The public hearing for this application is scheduled for January 25th. Okay. I think you've seen these approval criteria before. We've had a couple of these projects in the last few months. But again, this is a type 3 review for the building height variance in the DMU zone. And the approval criteria for such a building height variance request, consistency with the applicable downtown design guidelines, exceptional quality in the building, preserving views to the Willamette River, and that the project provides public benefits and or amenities beyond those required by the base zone standards. Okay. As a standalone residential building, and that the review is solely about the requested additional story in height, the applicable guidelines to the height variance are certain aspects of the Milwaukee character and the pedestrian emphasis design guidelines. And we submitted our review, the staff review of the standards and guidelines, the checklist for downtown design review. So the applicable guidelines again are some aspects of Milwaukee character and the pedestrian emphasis. And the applicant submitted materials to discuss and talk about how their project meets those guidelines. And we submitted with the staff report findings to show our analysis of how the project complies with those guidelines. Again, as it relates to the building height variance itself. So again, the proposed building is just under 65 feet tall. So it does comply again with the measured maximum building height of 69 feet, but because it's asking for 6 stories rather than 5. Again, that would allow for 9 additional dwelling units as well as that roof deck that you can see here in this image. The site is nearby or adjacent to a variety of building scales, styles, and sizes. And the size of this building is appropriate with its sort of adjacency or close proximity to the Axle Tree development, which is just across the railroad tracks on 21st on Washington Street. It's also sort of close, but it sort of has a relationship with the recently approved Coho development as well. So when we're talking about the scale of buildings in the immediate vicinity, it is scaled to have a direct relationship with those buildings. The building is designed to orient views toward downtown and the river itself, and again has that rooftop deck to allow for tenants to be able to do that, to see the downtown views as well as the river views. 80% of the units are designed to have direct views into a central courtyard, and all of the units have windows on at least 2 sides, which provides an opportunity for views from multiple directions in each living space. The location of the windows in the units and the open air balconies allow for views of the surrounding sites from all sides of the property and of the building. To further break down the scale of the building, all of the facades, including the street facing facade, are broken down into rhythms, and this was described in the applicant materials, into rhythms which correspond to a more residential scale, and it delineates between the individual units in the buildings with vertical flashing breaks. Material applications support a breakdown of scale and delineation, again, as described in the applicant materials. They're proposing a box rib vertical wood siding and metal panels, depending on the area of the building and the corresponding use of that section of the building. Oops, sorry. The additional story and the height allow the building's program to be dispersed more vertically, which allows for opportunities for open space and pedestrian interaction on the ground floor and adjacent to the public right of way. The project does include a 5-foot dedication along the north, as well as an open terrace directly accessible off Washington Street. So there are opportunities for pedestrian interaction with the building and with views. The building's main entries are set back 3 feet to provide protection from the weather, as well as an enhanced pedestrian walkways. And the facades include jogged parapet heights. And there is and you can see that there is, because of where the roof deck is, there's sort of a step back here as well, again, away from the rail line. And at the ground level, recessed entries and overhangs align with the proposed parapet jogs and the vertical breaks to create that relationship both with the building and at the pedestrian scale. As far as to public benefits, the proposal is for all of the 55 units to be workforce priced housing, which means that they will be affordable to folks making 80% or below of the area median income. So it is considered an affordable housing development, and again contributes to the continued revitalization of the downtown while providing some additional much needed housing both in the city as well as in the downtown area. Okay. So again, we're here presenting the project to you, and the applicant will be as well, of course, asking for DLC's, the committee's recommendations to the Planning Commission for the hearing that will be on January 25th. Again, the questions are if the development meets the criteria for the height variance, And if the committee members have any suggestions for how the design could better meet the guidelines relative to that requested building height request for the 6 stories rather than the maximum of 5, that's permitted in the DMU. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can about the staff report. And again, the applicant team is here with a presentation as well. But if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
Have any questions at the moment? Mary, do you have any?
Not right now.
Yeah, I think I'd like to hear what the applicant has to say and hear their perspective about things.
I'm promoting members of the applicant team over. Thank you, Vera, for that presentation.
Did we receive any correspondence other than what was included in the meeting packet? Is there anything else that, like any comments from, or anything in addition, or is that all current?
If I may, we didn't receive any comments from the public notice that was mailed out. No.
Good evening. I think that I just figured out how to unmute myself there with the permissions. Are you guys able to hear me? It's Jessamine with WPA. I was going to see, I wasn't sure if Jennifer or Jesse were on the line, if either of them could have a quick minute just to introduce themselves as the development team before I jump into the design deck. Is that possible?
Yeah, hi, Jessamine. This is Jessie Ledesma here. If you don't mind going to your first slide with the team, that might be a great prompt for me to introduce everyone.
Just for the record, I'm still trying to promote Holly King as a panelist. There we go. I think that finally went.
And I think my screen should be up now.
Yep. Perfect. And are we ready to jump in, or are we waiting on anyone else?
I think I've got everybody promoted in there from your list.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present this project to you all. We're really excited about bringing this project to Milwaukee. My name is Jessie Ledesma. I'm with Homework Development, along with Jen Dillon of Wild Hair Development. We're supporting the owner, Soto LLC, in their endeavor to build a landmark housing project here in this wonderful downtown Milwaukee location. The architects are with Works Progress Architecture, also called WPA, and that team will take you through a quick summary of the presentation and the design, and will be available to answer any questions you all have about the design or any of the code questions. And you can see our landscape, structural engineer, and civil engineering team is also on board. If you go to the next slide, you know, we're really excited to bring this project to this location for a few reasons. One is, as Vera mentioned, we think it supports the goals for downtown revitalization and smart densification adjacent to mass transit in that downtown location. We're excited to bring a really high quality mass timber construction building to that location. And most importantly, we're excited to bring, you know, much needed workforce affordable housing to the city of Milwaukee, which is really consistent with the City of Milwaukee's housing affordability strategy and action plan for 2018 through 2023, as well as the City of Milwaukee's vision for 2040. As you can see in this summary, the 6-story 55-unit building is proposed as workforce affordable. And as Vera mentioned, that is targeted to tenants earning up to 80% of the median family income affordability, subject, of course, to anticipated funding subsidies that will support that program. And if anyone has questions about what those rents and incomes look like, there's a little snapshot of that below. If there are any questions on the overall development team, the development goals, or the housing program, I'm happy to answer, but I'll turn it over to Jasmine and her team to talk about the building design.
Great, thank you. Can you guys all hear me? Perfect. Well, I think Vera did a fantastic job presenting the facts about the project to you, and now you've got a little bit more on who we are and what we're doing. So I will briefly kind of run through. We have a lot of slides just to make sure everything's here for documentation's sake, but I'll run through and just hit some of the features to kind of align some of those facts with the design of the development. So as noted, the site is located just here on Southeast Washington, kind of on the corner of the rail line between 21st and 23rd. And these are a few views of the site itself, just to give you some context. Additionally, there's a few views here of adjacent developments that we think are pertinent to the scale and the design and how we're applying. So the new high school here down on the corner, Axle Tree Apartments right across the way. There's an older development directly across the street on Southeast Washington up here. And then of course, Main Street, kind of looking to the south where you can see Axle Tree, which is a similar scale of our proposed building. So the design itself, as mentioned, is really focused on providing as much natural light and air as we can to as many units as possible. We've created massing that allows for this cutaway courtyard central to the project, which gives basically every unit a view into that open air courtyard, as well as out to the exterior of the building. The additional height that we're requesting, as mentioned, allows for one more floor within the 69 feet, but does get us extra space for amenities and open deck, as well as kind of a large public lobby space on the ground floor. You'll see those in a few more of the 3D views here as we pan through. Just an aerial from above to give a bit more of a view down into that protected courtyard, where at the street face, we're fencing off to provide a public terrace and buffer a bit from the train yard. And then as that steps down into the common space courtyard, you access the lowest level of the building, which is basement storage for a significant amount of bike storage, as well as some utility. This is a view a bit more into those courtyards specifically. So on the left, you see the fenced terrace that you can access directly from the right-of-way, and then the more private courtyard that steps down, centrally located in the building. That's also kind of providing some additional seating and breakout kind of casual areas along the way. So the stair is a relaxed step, as well as kind of these zones that are provided within the stair for hanging out. One more view of the terrace. And a few plans to better describe the site. So this is just looking down from above. The large plan here is the main courtyard. You can see through from the lobby along Southeast Washington here at the north, all the way through with significant glazing at the corner, all the way to the courtyard where there's another wall of glazing into that. So you get great views out to the street and in from the street. And then the more protected courtyard down below as it steps down, providing a bit more buffer from the railway, as well as privacy and security for the bike storage below. Additionally, there is a roof deck, as mentioned, on the top floor, where we cut away also to provide kind of a stepped massing to some of the smaller scale buildings to the south. That also allows for access for all the tenants for additional outdoor seating, fire pit, some counter space, and an assortment of landscape plantings. I'll run pretty quickly through the plans just to point out kind of the program elements that were discussed. So starting at the very lowest level, our basement, as mentioned, provides almost double the bike storage requirements with 82 spaces. We are offering all the standard spaces, as well as a set of kind of vertical compact spaces, so there's a variety. As you move up into the building, the main floor is where we have a pretty significant open lobby. It combines our mail and like a social laundry room, a large amenity space, and then that's what opens up out to the terrace, as well as directly to the public right-of-way to the north. The large gray bar you see is kind of utilities and circulation. And then the orange and the yellow are the units that you'll see access off of the open air corridor, which is kind of this light gray. And the green is all of the outdoor common terrace and courtyard. As you move up the building, the footprint remains the same for the typical floors. So we have 2 bedrooms on each corner. Each bar provides alignments for these units to have windows on both sides, which is pretty unique to a building of this scale and this offering. So you'll see even the 1 bedrooms have windows and direct kind of passive ventilation through from north to south on both sides. And then of course, the 2 bedrooms have an even more generous 3-sided alignment to windows and natural ventilation. And then at the top floor, we cut away at that one southeast corner to provide the step down as well as, the southwest corner, as well as the roof deck amenity. Quick roof plan. And then elevations to describe some of the heights and the requests. So this is along the north side where you'd be coming directly off of the street. The large storefront that you see on the ground floor is open to the lobby, the public space, as well as the utilities over coming to the corner. We buffer with kind of a metal panel there so that it's more durable and provides a breakdown of the materials. And then you'll see in the residential floors above, breaking up that mass with flashing and parapet jogs to create a smaller kind of residential scale. As you come around the building, this is on the property edge side. There is kind of an open air walkway along so that you can access utilities and then also access the open corridor to the unit corridors above. Same application of materials and flashing reveals and the jogs of the parapet here to continue that same vertical breakdown all the way around. This is along the south side where we have basically a whole facade of residential. Because of the change in grade, you most likely would never see, but below you would be able to see through to the open air bike storage below. And then looking from what would be the train tracks, here you can see into the courtyard, as well as the 2 faces of kind of those residential bars. These are a few elevations of the courtyard itself, where you can see the open air corridor is a bit shielded from sun and direct view, just with some perforated box rib to provide the guardrail. Additionally, this is also where we have the vertical wood siding that was mentioned to create kind of more of a residential and hands-on application of a material. Coming around the longer edge, same material application, same open air corridor. And that got us through the whole thing. If anybody has questions about specific program elements or applications of materials or the code responses, I'm happy to answer them or dig into anything.
Well, this is Mary Newstetter. I like the style. I like the location. I like the fact that it's affordable. I like the fact that it has light, but I'm not completely convinced that you were successfully able to break down the scale of the building, so it's more residential, using, you know, the vertical flashing that you referred to and the materials. And I'm just wondering if you could respond to that for me. It may be just because I haven't seen enough to really convince me of that in terms of what we're given to look at.
Sure. I mean, are you wondering kind of like dimensionality of that, or what our thoughts are on?
You said that you were able to address that using certain materials and certain flashing and that kind of thing. So it looks more residential. I'm just wondering if you could call some of that out and kind of go into more depth about what you're talking about. Because I see it, I don't see it as being, you know, smaller residential building. I see a big building there, which I like. I don't think it's necessarily been scaled down.
Yeah, I think, so when I say break it down to a more residential scale, I think relative to the quantity of units we're providing, it's not going to break down to, say, the you know, single family home residential, if that's kind of the question. But I think what we were hoping to provide was something that was relative to some of the other newer developments that are cropping up in the area, and something that would provide you know, that quantity of units, 55 units at this scale, is going to be, you know, a 5 or 6 story building. So looking at ways to break that down in terms of patterns and scale that are relative to those widths and kind of those parameters. So what we looked to do, because of kind of the mass in general, was to both break it down first by kind of cutting away at the courtyard to create that open air effect, and the light, and that you'll, for each unit itself, I think on a private experience of it, you will get a greater sense of that residential scale. So walking into the open air courtyard, walking along your balcony and to your front door, there are natural woods. You know, you can see into the courtyard and the greenery and the landscape. You have immediate fresh air and sunlight on your face. And then you enter into a unit that has, you know, windows on 2 sides, if not 3 sides, which is pretty significant for a residential development of this scale. And then from a larger perspective, in terms of, you know, looking at the building from afar or from a pedestrian view, we're looking to break it down both by creating a pretty strong ground floor residential public face. So at the lobby with the large windows and the views in, to provide a really kind of interactive experience there. So it doesn't feel like a big wall, like a big building from that, the pedestrian experience. And then as you're looking even further away, trying to break down the mass itself. So we've created these vertical reveals, which I'll kind of try and highlight. I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse on the screen, but as the parapet jogs, you'll see we also provide reveals at the face, the facade of the building. So we break it down by bays of windows that would be more residentially scaled. So, you know, 2 bays of windows or 1 bay of windows creates kind of a large vertical, as opposed to one large facade. And along with that, I think the material change as you come around the corners from the box rib, as you see kind of on the residential levels, and then the metal panel and the glass that you see at the ground floor. Did that help at all to better kind of describe our approach? Or?
Yeah, I understand that. I was more concerned about not the person living in it, but the people who are the public who are looking at it. That's what I was really concerned about.
Yeah, I think it's in a unique position where it's kind of transitioning between these newer developments and larger developments, and some of the smaller residential, you know, further out. And so it feels like a good stepping stone to provide this, you know, the right scale and the right breakdown, but it is different than what you're going to see in a single family development or home, for that matter.
Desmond, can I offer just one other response to that question? Because Mary, I think it's a great question. I understand where you're coming from. I would say on the development side, you know, we did contemplate buildings that are a more typical floor plan with a double loaded corridor, wherein we can actually fit more units that way. But we deliberately went with this courtyard model because we did think if it fit into the neighborhood better and just broke down the mass of the building, even though we did lose units in that configuration. We love that it opens up to the river and that it's not such a monolithic building that takes up the entire site.
Thank you.
I think on a related note to that, it was a great question, Mary, because I was also kind of looking for a little more clarification on that. So that was helpful. One thing, and this is more just a suggestion for when you talk to the Planning Commission, is maybe providing a little more context. So even just seeing like this elevation, like the main elevation and axle tree next to it, even just in very basic graphic terms, just so that you can see that comparison in scale. I think that might be very helpful to get your point across. Just in one single graphic sweep. So I think for me, that's what I was struggling with a little bit, was just seeing this in context with other buildings that are nearby. And it is kind of an interesting transition of this neighborhood right now, because you have a couple of these newer developments, but then you have a lot of, you have some empty spaces and you have a lot of single story buildings. So it's still kind of this funky mix, so so maybe just a little more neighborhood context with your building kind of superimposed, even if it's just from a massing standpoint, I think would be helpful. So I think the other question that I had, and it's more just confirming with you, is that for the height variance, am I understanding it correctly that if you were not able to get that 6th story, that you would not be able to have the bulk of those shared amenities that you mentioned? Is that the trade-off really? So if that door was gone, you wouldn't be able to do a lot of those other things?
Right, so the current zoning allows for up to 69 feet that we can get without having to make kind of the additional request, but it's only with 5 stories. So we're requesting that 6th story within the same allowance of height, but that does give us the room to provide those additional amenity spaces, the large courtyard, the common areas, the things that would ultimately get squeezed down if we had to lose a floor's worth, to still provide as many units as possible.
I think the amenities that you're providing are really great. So I just wanted to, I know it's a difficult balance to achieve sometimes. So so that's good to know. Okay. I think I only had one other, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just add on just a little bit more on that. I think also too, it's important to keep in mind that we're trying to create as much affordable housing on this very transit-oriented site. And when we saw that we'd be under the height limit, but could potentially go an additional story and then keep those amenity spaces open, that really allows us to do both, right? We get to add 9 more housing units that wouldn't be there, and we'd have smaller amenities. So it hits both ways. Yeah.
I only had one other question, and it wasn't necessarily in relation to the height variance. It had to do with the parking. And I don't know if that's something that is okay for us to talk about during this particular review, but it's just something that kind of caught my eye. It's more just a functional question of how the arrangement works with those other 2 properties. If that's a long-term arrangement that you're making or that you'd be making with them, or if that is something that can change at any given time should the owners decide to sell their buildings. Because I'm all for using alternate forms of transportation, but I also want to be realistic about people owning cars. And even if they may not own their gas guzzler for very long, they're going to, get a hybrid or an electric car or something else. But just want to make sure we're kind of covering bases as far as that's concerned.
If I may interrupt just for a second to answer the thrust of the question, Tracy, and that is, and Vera, I'll ask you to maybe correct me, and that is, my understanding of the what's in front of the DLC tonight is not the parking question. There is a parking modification element to the application that the Planning Commission will be in a position to evaluate. But so I mean, I'll leave it to the applicant team if you want to respond as part of explaining the overall project. But just to be clear, that I think that what the DLC is charged with is considering and making a recommendation about the building height variance.
I can just say very briefly, the agreement that we have with this property that you're seeing on screen right now in the top left corner is providing 23, how many, Jasmine? 23 additional unit parking spaces. That owner has agreed to reconfigure all the parking on their site in order to maximize the number of parking spaces. They will be adding 11 more spaces and then giving us 20 more. That is a 3-year minimum lease. And anything above and beyond that, we have the right to release those spaces unless they sell their property. And that would be contingent, we can't stop someone from selling their property. So that's the most we can offer. And then the Oddfellows space, which is further away, is another space, and those terms are similar.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit better sense of what was involved there.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I'm wondering if anybody's thought about if there might be any impact from those people who live there who don't lease a parking space and just park their car randomly in the neighborhood. Has that been thought about? Is that an issue? Just curious.
Jesse, do you want to talk about the studies that we?
Yeah, I would just offer that we provided a wonderful study through some researchers at Portland State University as part of our application that really addresses that question in a lot of detail. So I won't try to summarize it tonight, but there's quite a bit of information there that is related to that topic. And I would just say the impact is minimal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mary, do you have any other questions?
You asked me if I have any. I actually have an issue with the building that's being raised because it is historic. And I apologize. Well, let me just stop there. I don't have any other questions about the new building.
Okay.
So if we're if we finish discussing that, I would like to bring up the issue of the building that's being raised.
Okay, I think, yeah, I don't have any.
I can't hear you very well. I don't know why.
I don't have any further questions about the new building for the moment, so.
So do you want me to talk about?
Yes, yes, please.
Apologize for not getting back to you. I just looked at this today and I realized that we were looking at a historic building. And I don't know if there's been any discussions about the building internally or with the developer or the architects, but just to bring everybody up to speed, this building has a name. It's the R. Dewey House, and it was reviewed in 1988 as part of the Milwaukee's historic survey, but it was determined not to be important enough to provide any protection to it. But in 2002, when they extended the light rail out, they were using federal dollars, so federal dollars required that they do a review of the buildings along the line to determine if they were historic, and if they were historic, then determine whether there would be an adverse effect on these buildings because of the rail line. And so the R. Dewey House was determined eligible to be listed on the National Register. They cited the fact that it was a good local example of Dutch colonial architecture or Dutch colonial revival architecture. And the building is surprisingly intact, it's especially surprising because the building has been both a resident and offices. And when you change that use, you generally get a building that's being altered, but that's not the case in this building. So I would presume that even though it isn't on our local register, that if we had an updated historic survey, that it would be included. But my understanding is because it's not on our local historic register, we have no responsibility locally to protect it or to go through any process. And because there aren't any federal dollars used in the building of the new building, then we aren't obligated under the State Historic Preservation Act to do anything. But I think we still need to acknowledge the fact that we are losing another local historic building. And we did that last time when we were tearing down when they were tearing down the bowling alley by asking the developer to do a historic study of the house and provide photographs. And that's something we could do here, but it's already been done because when they determined the building eligible, they also determined that the rail line would have an adverse effect on the building. So the responsibility of the MTA then was to do a historic narrative and photographs. So that, I don't think it's a perfect job, but it's a good job. And you can find it on the web on the Oregon Historic Site database. So that's something that's already been done. But there are a couple of things that come to mind that I think we might consider, and I'll throw them out there. One is that if it were on our local register, then it would be protected by, or at least some protection provided by our ordinances that require that the owner who's going to raise the building put it up for sale for a certain amount of time. And that typically, very rarely are they successful in selling it. Typically what would be done is you would sell the house for a nominal fee and then somebody would move it somewhere else. Because it's so expensive to move buildings, it's rarely done. But I'm just wondering if it might be different these days since housing prices are absurdly high, that it might be cheaper to buy it, to get a house at a very inexpensive price and move it. Now that depends on whether there are places in the area, I don't know. But that's something that I think the city might think about. The other issue is that the city of Portland in 1916 they have a new ordinance, and it's the first ordinance in the United States. It requires the owner of the property, if they are demolishing it, that they do a manual deconstruction, not that it be mechanically demolished. So that means that, and they actually are a lot of people in the area now who are doing that, who are certified, who go in and they take the windows out, they take the roof off, they remove the molding, they deconstruct it. And the results have been that these deconstructions recycle about 85 to 95% of what's there. So in this case, you have a historic property and those features that are historic are indeed recycled. The valuable buildings, that valuable wood, et cetera, in it is recycled. And on top of that, you aren't filling up the landfill. So I think in many ways, it's a very reasonable approach, especially when you have a historic building and you want to save some of those pieces. So I'm wondering if that's something we could, consider.
I think that's a great point, Mary. I think this had come up in the project where we had the bowling alley go as well. And in that one, I think one of the things that came up when we were talking about deconstructing existing buildings is the possibility of using, if there's any, particularly interesting components or some really nice, say like wood or some nice materials in that building that could potentially be repurposed for interior applications in the new building, in lobbies or circulation ways or things like that. That's something to consider as well. It's another way to kind of pay homage to what was there before. So it's something to consider. But I think a deconstruction of that building is something that we could at least make a recommendation to the Planning Commission about. I don't know how open the design team is to that suggestion, but I personally think it's something worth considering. I don't know if any of you want to weigh in on that at all. I know it's a lot, but
I can respond with two thoughts. Just I think the idea of using some significant materials, in the lobby or for site furniture even, is something that I've done before, and it is a wonderful way to pay homage. And I think that's absolutely something that we'd love to consider. I think hand deconstructing the entire building is actually very expensive. So that is certainly a budget, that would be a budget add to do the entire building. But I think that, being very thoughtful about and deliberate about reusing certain pieces of it would certainly be something that we could do. And then the idea of offering the building up for someone to move, I would have to talk to the owners about this, of course, but I don't see why not. I mean, we could, as long as we, all kind of agreed on a reasonable time frame. Yeah, again, I can't answer that question today, but I think it's certainly worth considering. And if that's a precedent in the city, we could, offer that through the city channels.
Well, I was doing some reading, and the figures that I got, and this is such a new practice that I don't know how accurate they are, but they were saying that it costs, depending on the size of the building, between $10,000 and $20,000 to completely deconstruct it. And while, it is nice to sometimes to add pieces of the property that's been demolished and put it into the design of the new building, I think sometimes that's just too easy. I mean, I really feel like it would be a better thing to do to actually deconstruct the whole thing and ensure that it's not put in a landfill. And I know that's not your concern, but I think it's something that the city really should be looking at and encouraging.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in just to say that yeah, I appreciate these points, especially understanding your expertise, Mary, in the particular field of historic preservation. I think you have correctly identified a lot of the situation, which is, a lot of your points I think are aspirational. They're ones that, because the property is not officially listed as a historic property on the city's list, it's not really subject to our local review. You probably know better than most of us whether there are any other higher levels, like at the state or federal levels, of consideration that the owners and developers should be aware of. But in terms of our local review, and especially with what you're tasked with, I'm afraid that the historic piece of it is a little beyond the pale. I think that these are certainly some points that you could include in what we've been having the group do, is provide kind of a formal recommendation to the Planning Commission, noting where there are recommendation points that relate specifically to approval criteria for the particular application or applications that are in play, as well as I think we've had kind of a more general category of some additional thoughts or considerations. And I think that some of what you've brought up would be appropriate to reference that way. And because it does seem like, especially where there's willingness, at least on the part of the development team, to consider suggestions with the understanding that they're, at least in terms of what our local ordinances are, it would be a voluntary response. But because I think the Planning Commission will need to be, and Vera will do this, I think, make it very clear, like, what the parameters are of their consideration, that in particular, because there's not a historic resource designation of the site, the Planning Commission, will only have a kind of, as my understanding, a similar ability to suggest or propose or encourage the developer to consider some of these things. And I think those are all fair points to bring up, just especially as part of a public discussion about this. But just to be clear about, when it comes to where the actual rules are, that unfortunately in this case, they're, the historic piece of it is not really in play. And you know, Vera, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, but I think we can certainly try to capture some of these suggestions in an overall recommendation, just being very clear about where the approval criteria are for what things.
Yeah, if I may, thanks, Brett. Yeah, I think the Planning Commission would be very happy to hear, you know, from the DLC, you know, all of these aspects. They, of course, are clear on what their approval criteria are and sort of where they are in their decision making. But I think this is a great discussion, and I think it's something that, you know, if the city and the applicant can kind of meet somewhere in the middle on some ways to kind of handle or address these concerns, I think that would be great. But if there is a way to capture this in the recommendation to the Planning Commission, I think that would be a nice addition, you know, to the overall discussion, you know, understanding, you know, the guardrails, you know, under which we're all operating, that is the code. But I think this is a great discussion. And Mary, I appreciate you bringing this up. This wasn't something that I was looking back at our historic properties list and doing all that stuff, and I did not know, you know, about, I saw that it was on the list and then it was not on the list. I'm like, okay, I know how to direct the applicants on how to deal with this. So I appreciate the additional background. And if there's a way that, you know, that there's some way that we can, you know, kind of capture, you know, what you're talking about, you know, with the applicant team, maybe there's something that we can do here. But I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
I think I did have one question pertaining to bicycle parking. And I know these are like minutia items, but I love that you have so much bike parking, by the way. I think that's fantastic. I guess my question is how does it work for guests or people who are just visiting the building for a brief period of time? Are there no bike racks at all on the, like, at the street level?
I believe there is intention to have short-term bike parking at the front entry as well. Not as significant, but I believe two or
a couple spots. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was being considered.
I'm more familiar with the city of Portland, but typically you would apply to PBOT, you know, as you're completing construction for as many, you know, short-term spaces in the sidewalk right away as you can, and they'll tell you what you're allowed to build. Okay. I'm guessing City of Milwaukee is similar with the transportation team, but I'm not as familiar with that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was on the radar. So, but yeah, as far as the height variance is concerned, I don't know. For me personally, I don't have a problem with the additional story as long as it fits within that height, the height limit. I was more just wanting to actually hear from Vera a little bit about what has been discussed so far. And it was brought up kind of in more general terms, but if there's anything else pertaining to that height variance that we should be aware of as committee members, is there anything else from that, or is it more just you gauging kind of how we feel about it?
Yeah, yes, I think the way, the feedback that we, you know, are hoping for, you know, to get the recommendation of the Planning Commission, who will be ultimately issuing the decision based on those approval criteria, was, you know, do you agree? The staff recommendation is that the height variant, that the design and the application materials and so on meet the criteria for the height variance. And so we are recommending approval of that. And so what we were looking for was, you know, your feedback as, you know, the design experts, and, you know, making sure, did we capture what we needed to capture? Did you notice anything else that we should be thinking about as far as from a staff recommendation or certainly from the applicant, or to help the Planning Commission make a decision on the 25th. So if there were recommendations like that, it sounds like, if I may, it sounds like, as today's committee, the two of you, that you don't oppose the height variance as presented and with the design that was presented, which is great feedback, certainly for the applicant team and for me as staff as well. So this is, like I said, this has been a really good discussion, and I appreciate the additional questions that you're asking. It's helpful for me as well to hear the back and forth as we prepare for the Planning Commission hearing as well. But no, the guidance or the discussion that we were looking for is, have we missed anything? Do you agree as the DLC that they have, that the design does in fact meet and comply with the approval criteria for the height variance for that additional story? And it sounds like it does. So thank you.
Yeah. Mary, do you have any other comments or questions pertaining to the height?
No, I don't. I certainly agree with the additional story.
Well, let's see. At this point, do we want to see at this point, Brett, if there's any public comment?
Yeah, I think we should ask if either of the two, there are two people who are still in the attendee category, Joshua Schulman and Stan Schulman, just to ask. I think we're at that point where we could entertain public comment if either of those individuals has comment, if they'll raise a hand, or I'll allow them both to talk if either of them would like to share. You're free to unmute if you'd like, or not.
Josh and Stanley are actually owners.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they're kind of on the applicant team, I guess. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, doesn't sound like there's any other comment.
I guess we kind of did jump ahead a little bit, but is there, Vera or Brett, do you have any additional comments that you'd like to bring up?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's see. And Mary, you and I think we're good with our questions and comments. We're good with our questions and comments at this point. I think have you had all your questions answered or at least brought up?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
I'm good to go.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Does the applicant team have any additional comments that they'd like to bring up before we close the public comment period?
Nothing on our part. Just wanted to say thank you for everybody's time and the discussion and the questions. These are all important, and we really appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you for providing all this information and being forthcoming with answering our questions. All right, so I think at this point, the public comment portion of this design review meeting, VR 2021-017 is closed. And we've already kind of gone through a bit of the committee discussion, but Mary, at this point, I think you and I are in agreement about the height variance being acceptable as presented. So I think we're good there. And I think our other questions and comments that we brought up, regarding, I know the parking itself is going to be addressed more as part of the Planning Commission meeting. So I'll be very curious to hear kind of how that discussion turns out and what gets decided about that. And then Mary, all of your great comments and questions about the historic building on the property and kind of what suggestions would be for potentially, making the most of saving that building in whatever capacity that could be. I think we'd want to make just a recommendation or an informational kind of add on to our minutes for the Planning Commission, just so they're aware of our thoughts about that. But at this point, I think unless there's something else that I missed there, I think we're ready for a motion for the height variance.
Can I just jump in real quickly to see if I think you summed that up pretty well, Tracy. I want to make sure I'm catching what it seemed like the two main points of Mary's recommendation or suggestion related to the historic preservation piece was one, encouraging the owners to make an attempt to sell the house, the structure, in the event that it maybe could be moved, and two, barring that there be a look at attempting to manually deconstruct, preferably all of the building, but at least potentially some of it to save or be able to recycle as much of the material as possible. Mary, is that a fair characterization of those 2 points?
Yes.
Okay.
Very.
Okay. Thank you.
At this point, do I entertain a motion at this point, correct? Okay.
And you're a little faint, Tracy.
Sorry. So I guess at this point, I'd like to call for a motion.
I move that we approve the height variance for the building at whatever the address is.
Right. Recommend approval of the height variance.
And, I will second that. We're all in favor at this point. So, okay. So the Design and Landmarks Committee recommends approval of VR-2021-017. We don't have conditions of approval at this point, but we have recommendations for how to best address the building that's on the property, and those will be included in our recommendations to the Planning Commission. This decision is a recommendation to the Planning Commission, which will make the final decision after a public hearing scheduled for January 25th. If there are any details that are needed for the Planning Commission process.
What was the last part of what you said, Tracy? Sorry.
It's just if there's any questions or need for additional details about the Planning Commission process, to please see planning staff.
Thank you. So with that, I think I will thank Vera and the applicant team, Jessman and others. I'll return you to attendee status. You're welcome to stay if you want for the rest, probably short part of our meeting, but I'll return you to that status, and you can decide to stay or go from there. That's all right.
Thank you very much
for your time.
Thanks. Happy New Year. Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, just a moment here to. Change statuses. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for
Sorry
that.
about that. It's not quite not my forte at this point.
Well, you jumped in on the fly with that, so thank you. Take a quick look at the agenda here. Yeah, so there were no work session items. The other primary item on the agenda was under other business and updates was I would just want to take a few minutes to give you a little bit of an update about what we're expecting to have happen in 2022. I know I really appreciate everyone's continued flexibility and patience with the repeated cancellation of meetings. I think we, in addition to having a little bit of staff transition where we had a few people, leave the staff, and we brought a couple of people on board and have been orienting them. And also just, Laura, especially trying to get things lined up for some of the long range projects that are coming up this year and beyond. We hadn't been able to return as quickly as we wanted to try to finish the project that you all have been working on for the last couple of years. That is the update to the downtown design review piece. And what I can say about that is, we've talked just before the end of the year with Elizabeth Decker, who was the code consultant that we had worked with before, and who'd come to a couple of the meetings and been helping us with that. She also was pretty involved in some of the statewide work that was happening, where different communities, including Milwaukee, were having to update our housing code in response to the recent changes in state law to promote more middle housing, affordable housing alternatives. And so she is returning to having some availability to help us make a final push on this, probably in late March, early April. And so what we're thinking of doing with that is, Elizabeth and I are going to try to coordinate some in the meantime to pull together our, kind of our best latest draft of the code. And I think rather than planning to come back to the DLC repeatedly, at meetings during the course of the year, I think what we want to try to do is pull together the consolidated draft, identify any final outstanding questions, and kind of bring it to you probably in May. I think I've got that first Monday in May date as our tentative target for when we would come back to you, and not to belabor it, I guess, anymore beyond that, to really try to have a focused discussion to see if it seems like we've gotten things pulled into it that had been being discussed for the last many months, and especially in the context of these. This is now, I think, the third, they've all been different, but the third design review meeting that you've had, where we've had a chance to kind of see a little bit how some of the rules work. And for example, tonight, the clarification that because even though this project is downtown, in a downtown zone, because it is a multifamily or residential only project, as Vera noted in her presentation, the applicant had the option to kind of choose, and this is in our code right now in 19.907, to, if they could meet the multifamily standards, they would just go through that very clear and objective process. They also have the option of choosing to focus on the guidelines, the design guidelines that are in that 19.505 section for multifamily design, which isn't really downtown design review. And so in this case, the applicants, chose that path. And so that's why, even if it seemed a little bit awkward, that, we were really only here with the DLC tonight because of the height variance, the building height variance, and the fact that it was downtown. So it felt a little confusing.
It was tough to focus just on that piece.
Yeah, because the charge was really, I guess, like, how do the downtown design guidelines, if any, that relate to the height aspect, I guess, rather than does the whole design, how does it address all those standards in 508 that we've been talking about? So each of these three things has been a little bit different with respect to what they've had, but I think that's part of what will, even though it'll have been more months since we did those, by the time we get there, that I think the hope is that whatever impressions you might have had through these experiences of where there were awkward spots, or how you feel like what the result was, I guess, of these, to kind of take a final look at, does it seem like we're getting things sewed back together well, and are things clear enough, I guess. Are there some final places where we need to establish a little bit more clarity? Because I think we want to try to move, from the DLC then on to a couple dates with the Planning Commission in the second half of the year, and then on to the City Council, with the idea of kind of shepherding this through and finishing it by the end of the year. So all that to say, I think the hope is not to have, maybe we'll try and ask you if, depending on how the setup happens, if you're willing to do, maybe again, a couple of a little bit more abbreviated or closer in time, like maybe we try to fit 2 meetings in a month, for example, to kind of have a final focus discussion, or at least take 2 monthly meetings to do that, and then to kind of move it on to the Planning Commission, so that we're not bogged down again with that. So that's our hope. And beyond that, I think there may be some conversations to have about the continuing role of the committee. I mean, we still obviously need to convene to convene you when we have these design review projects, or if there's a historic preservation review project that comes in that actually has a land use application. But I think you could expect that for the time being, we'll probably still maintain a little bit of a hiatus situation while we try to pull this piece together. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions about that aspect immediately.
That seems reasonable to me. So.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said I would agree with that.
Okay. In a housekeeping kind of way, there's the city recorder has been making an effort to try to have a little bit more standardization, I guess, amongst the different boards and committees. And some of that is affecting a little bit, I guess, terms of service. So I think most of the DLC terms have been ones that end in March, at the end of March. And I think, and that's not consistent with other groups. And I think the push is to shift a little bit to ending at the end of June. Terms of service, it's a 3-month difference, but I think that's one thing that the city recorder is pushing. So I'll have to double check and see. There are some rules in the group's bylaws about how many consecutive terms you can serve without taking a break, and so I can't remember where everyone is with that. It may be, I think, Tracy, you're of the two of you, you're the newest one. So I think you're not in that situation. Mary, I think you're technically
terms.
Yeah, you've been right. So that kind of gets at the issue of recruitment, and some of that ties in too with what the city recorder's office is trying to do. They're trying to streamline a little bit the overall process of looking for people in the community who are interested in one or more of the different boards and committees, and trying to conduct interviews at kind of en masse, so that there's a larger pool of candidates, and not in the past. What we had done was when we had an opening, like Brett stepping off, we would, if we had a list, we'd kind of go back to that list and try to see if that person was interested, if a person or two was interested, or we'd try to scramble and get the city recorder's office to do some interviews and find some candidates. And that's obviously not always really efficient, especially because I think the city councilors have wanted to be involved in those interviews. And so that's part of why I think they're trying to consolidate some of this. So we probably won't have a new candidate, for example, for Brett's position until later in the summer. And I'm not actually sure what Dylan's status is as the kind of our youth member. I haven't been in good contact with him. I'm not even sure exactly where he is in school either. I think his term technically ends at the end of June this year, but I have the impression he may have kind of moved on to other things anyway. But so with all that in mind, I guess I just want to give you a little bit of an update about those aspects of it. That we'll share more info as we get more. But I think for the time being, you could expect that unless something comes up, like we have an actual land use application, we probably won't try to convene you again until probably May, possibly April, but probably May. So if you'll continue to guard at least the first Monday and be flexible, and that'd be appreciated. And that ties into, I think within the last couple of weeks, obviously some things have shifted again a little bit with respect to in-person meetings, and the city council was moving towards trying to get back to some in-person meetings for themselves, having a hybrid option where they would be in person and people could come in person, but some of them would also be virtual. And I think with the Omicron variants surging, they've kind of delayed those plans. So for the time being, I think we're still expecting that whatever meetings we will have will continue to be virtual, which I don't know. I feel like you guys have really exercised a lot of flexibility with this. To some degree, it seems like the virtual aspect makes it potentially a little bit easier to not have to travel. You can maybe do it even if you are out of town or something like that. But that will continue to be the case, I think, seems like at least for the next several months.
Okay.
So.
keep us in the loop.
Okay. Yeah. So that was all I had, I think, in terms of other business items, just to give you that update, and we'll let you know if more things change between now and the next month or two. But hopefully we'll have our ducks in a row for kind of a final push on the downtown design code update starting by May, I think.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Vice Chair Orvis, do you want to officially adjourn the meeting for us if there are no other items?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess our meeting is adjourned.
We'll call it. Okay. Thank you both. It's good to see you. Albeit virtually, it's nice to see you. I hope you're both having a good start to the year.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll
Well, take care. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.